Hello and welcome back to my channel. This video is about principles of bookkeeping controls, and today we're going to practice answering some exam questions about using the journal to correct errors. Before we proceed to our example, let me just mention that I have discussed suspense account and correcting errors in my previous video. If you want to check them out, I've put the link in the description down below. Now let's go to our example. Number 1, identify whether which of the errors described below would or would not be disclosed by the trial balance. So let's go through the errors one by one. First, receivables ledger of H Limited was not updated for the current month. The receivables ledger control account has been updated. The receivables ledger is the individual customer account, and it is not included in the trial balance. So even if it's not updated, it will have no effect to our trial balance. The receivables ledger control account, or RLCA, is included in the trial balance, but it says here that it's been updated, so there is no effect as well in our trial balance. So the first one is not disclosed by the trial balance. Next error, a credit note was recorded in receivables ledger control account only. It means the credit note was recorded to one side only, so this error is an example of single entry. The credit note was recorded in the credit side of RLCA, and no record was made in the debit side of the opposite account. So this means this error will be disclosed by the trial balance. Next, a payment from a credit customer M Limited was correctly recorded to the bank and debited to the receivables ledger control account. It means our credit customer M Limited have paid us, and it was correctly recorded to the bank, which is in debit. The opposite account should be credit, but instead it was also debited to the RLCA. So two entries were both recorded in debit, so this error is an example of two entries on one side. And this error will be disclosed by the trial balance. And for the last error, a rent payment of 1,000 was credited to the bank and debited to electricity. So this means we paid the rent and recorded it to credit to the bank account, which is correct, and instead of recording it to debit in rent account, it was recorded to debit in electricity expense account. This is an example of error of commission wherein rent and electricity are of the same type of account, which is an expense account. Since the amount that we have recorded in credit is equal to the amount that we have recorded in debit, even though it's in the wrong account, the trial balance will still balance, so this error will not be disclosed by the trial balance. Next, let's move on to the next question. Number 2, ABC Limited's trial balance at the end of the month has a credit balance of 29,533 and a debit balance of 29,607. The following errors were identified, so there are 4 errors. Letter A, how much is the suspense account needed to balance the trial balance? So we have to calculate the difference of the credit and debit. And it's 74. And this suspense account should be inserted to the side that has the lower total, which is credit. Next, letter B, complete the table below to show the journal entries to correct the errors and clear the suspense account. So each error has 2 lines that we need to fill in. Now let's go through the errors one by one. We'll follow the 3 steps that I have discussed in my previous video in the description down below. First error, the gross column of sales returns debug was incorrectly totaled up, amounting to 568 instead of 588. So we know that each column of the debugs are being totaled or casted at the end of the period, and that total amount is the amount that we transfer to the general ledger accounts. So we enter the total of the gross column of sales returns debug to RLCA. So let's follow the 3 steps to correct this error, and we will use this side as our blank paper. First, let's enter the account, debit, and credit. Then first error. First, let's put the incorrect entry. Then let's put RLCA, and the incorrect amount is 568. Let's put this amount in credit because this is from the sales returns debug. The sales returns decreases our RLCA, so it should be in credit. Then let's put 588 in debit. We don't have to determine what is that opposite account, is as long as we know that the correct amount is 588. Since the entry on the debit is not equal to credit, the suspense account is automatically inserted, which is the difference of these two amounts. So 20 is automatically inserted to the side that has the lower total, which is credit, to make the totals equal. Next, let's put the correct entry, which should be RLCA 588 in credit and 588 in debit. Again, we don't have to determine the opposite account as long as we know that this is the correct amount. Next, let's put the correction entry. This entry will be the journal entries to correct the errors and the answer to this question. Let's compare the correct entry and incorrect entry. First is the RLCA. The correct entry should be 588, but we only entered 568, so we have to add 20 more in credit. Next is the debit entry, 588, which is correct, so we will not add them to our correction. The suspense amount, 20 in credit, should be cleared, so we should put 20 in debit. Now we can transfer this to our journal entries. Next, let's move on to our second error. A payment made to a credit supplier was incorrectly recorded to payables ledger control account as 693 instead of 639. So let's put the second error here, and let's put incorrect entry. This is an error made to PLCA, so let's put PLCA here. This is a payment to a credit supplier, so it means it will decrease our PLCA, so let's put the 693 in debit. The opposite entry is correct, which is 639 in credit. Again, we don't need to identify the account. Probably it's the bank, but let's just put X. Since the entry on both sides are not equal, a suspense account was automatically inserted to the lower total, which is credit. So the difference of 693 and 639 is 54. Next, let's put the correct entry. PLCA should be 639 in debit and 639 in credit for the opposite account, which we don't have to identify. Next, let's put the correction entry. Let's compare the incorrect and correct entry. The correct amount of PLCA should be 639 in debit, but we entered 693 in debit. So we have to take out the excess amount and put it to credit. Next is the opposite entry, 639 in credit, which is correct, so we don't have to add it to our correction. Next, the suspense account, 54 in credit, should be cleared, so we should put 54 in debit. Then let's transfer them to our journal entries. Next, let's move on to the third error. The repair of office equipment of 400 was debited to office equipment. Let's put the third error here and put the incorrect entry. It says 400 was debited to office equipment, so let's enter them here. Then let's put the opposite entry, which we already know that is correct. So let's put 400 in credit and the account is X. Both sides are equal, so there was no suspense account inserted. Next, let's put the correct entry. The 400 in debit should be in the repair expense account and not in the office equipment account because this is just a repair of the office equipment. And then we don't have to identify the opposite entry, which is 400 in credit. Next, let's put the correction and let's compare the incorrect entry and the correct entry. First, the office equipment account is not a correct entry, so we have to remove the 400 in debit by entering 400 in credit. Next, the opposite entry, 400 in credit, is correct and the same, so we don't need to enter them to our correction. Next, the repair, 400 in debit, is the correct entry, but it's not entered yet, so we have to put it to our correction. Then let's transfer them to our journal. Next, let's move on to the fourth and last error. An electricity bill amounting to 300 was debited to the bank and credited to the electricity account. The electricity is an expense account and it should be debited to electricity, but it was incorrectly credited. Same as the payment from the bank, which was incorrectly debited, which should be credited. So there was a reversal of entries. So let's put the fourth error and the incorrect entry here. The 300 from the bank was entered in debit and the 300 for electricity was entered in credit. The amount on both sides are equal, so there was no suspense account automatically created. Next, let's put the correct entry. The bank 300 should be in credit and the electricity 300 should be in debit. Now let's put the correction entry and compare the incorrect and correct entry. First, the bank 300 in debit should be 300 in credit. So we have to remove this amount in debit by putting 300 in credit. Then let's put the correct entry, which is 300 in credit. Next, the electricity 300 in credit should be 300 in debit. So this 300 credit in electricity is incorrect and should be removed. So we will put 300 in debit. Then let's put the correct entry for electricity, which is 300 in debit. Then let's transfer them to our journal. But since we only have 2 lines for this entry, we could combine both the bank and electricity. So the amount will be 600. We're done answering all the questions, but we have to double check if our suspense account is now cleared. Let's create a suspense account and enter the difference in the trial balance, which is 74 in credit. Then let's enter the correction that we have made to our suspense account. First is 20 in debit, and the opposite account is RLCA. Next is 54 in debit, and the opposite account is PLCA. These are the only 2 entries to our suspense account, so this should clear our suspense account. Let's get the total of both sides and they should be equal. It means the suspense account is now cleared. And that's it for today's video. I hope you find it useful. If you want to watch more videos like this, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.